It's always quite interesting to read the Nobel Prize winning author V.S. Naipaul's writings, especially when it comes to his travel writings, the way he uh, captures the sense of a place and how easily he describes the complexities of a place. It's quite remarkable. I particularly enjoyed his book called Among the Believers, in which he was traveling in Muslim countries, especially in Iran after the Iranian Revolution. And it was quite interesting how he was able to capture the extremism, the religious sentiments which were there on the streets, and what he experienced in those times. Similarly, his book called An Area of Darkness is about his travels in India. And the book was published in 1964. And today I'm going to read a few pages from this book. And these are the ones which he wrote in Kashmir and are about Kashmir. A bit of historical context here might be helpful. In 1965, which was a year after this book was published, there was a war between India and Pakistan. And at that time, there were some militants that were sent from Pakistan's side to India, and then eventually it turned into a full-fledged war, and rest is history. But the point here is, when that happened, when those militants came from Pakistan to India, the Kashmiris didn't really favor those militants, didn't really support them. In fact, there have been instances where Kashmiris captured those militants and presented them to the Indian military. But things very much changed in the subsequent decades. And why that happened, how that happened, we can talk about that in some other podcast. But it's quite interesting when Naipaul was traveling in Kashmir in 1960s. You can sense there are certain political challenges. There are a few things going on here and there, but it's not really that big a problem as we see it today. So with that little background, let me start reading from the book. Here we go. The analysis of the Kashmir situation, which I had been reading endlessly in newspapers, had no relation to the problem as the Kashmiris saw it. The most anti-Indian people in the valley were Punjabi Muslim settlers, who were often in high positions. To them, Kashmiris were cowardly, greedy, and they often came to the hotel with rumors of troop movements, mutinies, and disasters on the frontier. To their politics, the Kashmiris brought not self-interest, but the gifts of myth and wonder. And their myths centered on one man, Sheikh Abdullah, the Lion of Kashmir, as Mr. Nehru had called him. He had made the Kashmiris free. He was their leader. He had been friendly to India, but had ceased to be friendly, and since 1953 had been, except for a few months, in jail. From Kashmiris, I could get no more. I could get no glimpse of the leader's achievements, personality, or appeal. Over and over, I was told, as if in explanation of everything, that when he came out of prison in 1958, there were crowds along the road from Khud to Srinagar and red carpets everywhere. Listen, said the college student, and I will tell you how Sheikh Abdullah won freedom for the people of Kashmir. For many, many years, Sheikh Abdullah had been fighting for the freedom of the people. And then one day, the Maharaja became very frightened and sent for Sheikh Abdullah. He said to Sheikh Abdullah, I will give you anything, even up to half my kingdom, if only you let me keep my throne. Sheikh Abdullah refused. The Maharaja became very angry and said, I will throw you in oil and make it hot. And you know what the result of that would be? That only a heap of ashes would remain. But Sheikh Abdullah said, all right, boil me in oil, but I tell you that out of every drop of my blood will grow another Sheikh Abdullah. When the Maharaja heard this, he was very frightened and he gave up the throne. That was how Sheikh Abdullah won the freedom for the people of Kashmir. I objected. I said that people didn't behave like that in real life. But it's true, ask any Kashmiri, he said. It was an account of the events of 1947 that ignored Congress, Gandhi, the British, the Pakistan invasion. And this was at the high level of literacy in English. Below this, there were people like Aziz who almost daily regretted the Maharaja's repressive rule because things were so much cheaper then. Recent history was already sinking into medieval legend. Aziz and the Khansama had served the British. They knew them as people of certain tastes, skills, and language, who had departed as unaccountably as they had come. But there had grown up a generation of students who had learned of the British only from the history books, and to them the British intervention was as remote as the Mughal glory. Bashir told me one day that the East India Company went away in 1947, and this, in our political discussions, was his sole reference to the British. Bashir was 19, college educated. I am best sportsman, he had said, introducing himself to me. I am best swimmer, I know all chemistry and all physics. He detested the Kashmiri and Indian habit of wearing pajamas in public, and he told me he never spat in the street. He regarded himself as educated and emancipated. He interdined with everyone, regardless of religions or sects. He wore Western-style suits and he spoke English as well as he did because I come from an unusually intelligent family, as he said. It might be that Bashir's ignorance of history was due to his stupidity or to his education in a language he did not fully understand, or to bad teachers and bad textbooks. I examined one of his history books later. It was a typical Indian textbook. It was in question and answer form and gave the preservation of purity as one of the virtues of the caste system and gave interbreeding as one of the reasons for the decline of Portuguese power in India. Or it might simply have been that Bashir and his friends took no interest in politics. And indeed, without newspapers and the radio, it was possible to be in Kashmir for weeks without realizing that there was a Kashmir problem. But there was money in Kashmir, more than there had ever been. In 1947, I was told there were 52 private cars in the entire state. Now there were nearly 8,000. In 1947, a carpenter earned 2 or 3 rupees a day. Now he could get 11 rupees. The new wealth showed in the increased number of veiled women. For example, like Tongawalas and the fuel vendors, a new veiled wife was a symbol of status. It is estimated that in Kashmir, as in the rest of India, 1/3 of development funds drains away in corruption and the exchange of gifts. No disgrace attaches to this. The Kashmiri tailor spoke with envious admiration of his Patwari friend, a surveyor and a type of records keeper, who in one day might collect as much as 100 rupees. A lorry driver had a similar admiration for a traffic inspector he knew who received monthly protection money from various lorry drivers. From time to time, there was an outburst in the press and parliament about corruption, and here and there frenzied action might instantly be taken. In one state, a minister had his doorman charged with corrupt practices. The doorman had bowed to him too low and too often, and by this had shown that he expected a tip. An architect in Delhi told me that even such token attempts to stamp out corruption could be demoralizing and dangerous. The system was necessary, and in India, it was the only system that could work. From the engineer, I learned how the system worked in Kashmir. A contractor dug, say, 100 cubic feet of earth. He sent in a bill of 200. Now it was precisely to frustrate such adventurousness that the Indian civil service method of checking and counter-checking had been devised. The contractor's claim had to be verified. The verification had to be endorsed, and the endorsement, to be brief, had to be approved. In the thoroughness of the system lay its equity. When verification was complete, everyone from top man to messenger was in the know, and everyone had to make some offering. The contractor was charged a fixed percentage of his extra profits, and this was divided again in fixed percentages among the employees of the department concerned. It was all regulated and above board. Everything the engineer said, smiling as he used the civil service phrase, went through proper channel. It was almost impossible for any government servant to contract out, and no one particularly wanted to. Tipping was expected. The contractor who dug 100 cubic feet and claimed for 100 cubic feet was likely to run into trouble. And it had happened that a civil servant who objected to corruption had been transferred or dismissed for corruption. Even if the contractor is a relation, the engineer said, he will still have to give something. It's the principle of the thing. The top man did not necessarily get the biggest cut of any levy, but in the long run he made out better than his subordinates because he got a percentage of more levies.